The Holy Gospel according to Matthew, beginning at the 16th chapter. Glory to you, O Lord. From that time on, after Peter confessed that Jesus was the Messiah, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and undergo great suffering at the hands of the elders and the chief priests and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, God forbid it, Lord. This must never happen to you. But he turned and said to Peter, Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me, for you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things. Then Jesus told his disciples, If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. For what will it profit them if they gain the whole world but forfeit their life? Or what will they give in return for their life? For the Son of Man is to come with his angels into the glory of his Father, and then he will repay everyone for what has been done. Truly, I tell you, there are some standing here who will not taste death before they see the Son of Man coming into his kingdom. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, O Christ. When I was in 5th grade, I was once assigned to be the line leader as we dismissed for the day. There's a power that comes with being a 5th grade line leader that's unlike anything else, and it was a deeply coveted position in the line. As I led my classmates down the 5th grade hallway on top of the world, I learned how quickly that feeling of power can change. One second, I was walking down the hall with my head held high, and the next, I was face first on the tile floor. To this day, I don't know exactly how I got there, though there's every possibility that all it took was a perfectly level tile floor for me to trip over. Peter learned a little something about a shocking, sudden impact in our gospel this week. The theme of identity plays a large role in Matthew's gospel, not only for Jesus, but for Peter as well. In the span of 2 chapters, Jesus first calls Peter, "You of little faith," after he rescues Peter from the depths of the sea. Then in the verses that we read last week, Peter boldly declares that Jesus is the Messiah. And Jesus names him the rock on which I will build my church. Not a bad place to be in the pecking order of the disciples, right? Yet, Peter learns some news that he finds particularly difficult to accept. As Jesus informs the disciples about his forthcoming death, Peter quite literally says, God forbid. And Jesus' response is a harsh one. Get behind me, Satan. You are a stumbling block to me. Jesus' response is quick, and the impact of his words, I would imagine, feel an awful lot like coming face first and crashing into a tile floor. Why would Jesus call his friend Satan? Well, let's take a look back at Jesus' last interaction with the tempter. We read a few months ago that after Jesus was baptized by John in the Jordan River, he was tempted in the wilderness for 40 days. During that time, the tempter repeatedly questioned Jesus' own identity and offered him ways to deny who he was. As we near the end of Jesus' earthly ministry, roughly 3 years later, Peter echoes those same words. Now, Jesus has learned quite a bit in his 3 years and responds much faster than he did the first time. As it turns out, it gets easier with practice. So how does the rock on which the church is built become a stumbling block? If Peter's declaration of faith is the rock and we become that rock through the power of the Holy Spirit during Pentecost, it's a question that we should be asking ourselves. We, like Peter, become stumbling blocks when we stop allowing each other to be who we truly are. Stumbling blocks are interesting. They can be large stones found in a path that trip us up. But they can also be as small as a stone that gets stuck in our shoe. You can't comfortably go very far with a stone in your shoe. You have to stop and take it out before you are able to continue on. The longer you go without dealing with the stone, the more damage it does to the body. So how do we get the stone out of our shoe? How do we go from being a stumbling block back to the rock on which the church is built? First, the church needs to recognize that the stumbling block exists. There's a temptation to ignore it and push through and hope that the problem will resolve itself. Unfortunately, that's when stones go from being irritating nuisances to inflicting open wounds and ultimately causing more harm. Next, the church needs to acknowledge that there is indeed something that we can do about the stumbling block. This might involve learning more about the issue, brainstorming ways to help, communicating and understanding what may not be a stumbling block for us personally may be a seemingly insurmountable one to our beloved siblings. Third, we have to stop and actually take the time to remove the stone from the shoe. Taking that time to stop is important. It involves removing the stumbling block, but also checking to make sure that we are headed in the right direction in the first place. After all, in our gospel reading today, Peter and Jesus are not headed in the same direction. And the final step toward real justice involves removing the stone from the path altogether so that it doesn't become a stumbling block for the next person who comes along. This isn't the only time that Peter falls on his face in his life, and the church will stumble again and again too, and that's okay. As long as the community recognizes that we aren't perfect and do the work to learn from the experience in order to do better next time. It gets easier with practice and with a community to share the load. Thanks be to God.